Gentleman played a part in that. The point I'm making is that police funding comes from both the grant and from the precept, and if you make normal assumptions about the precept, what we're asking is on average a 6% cash reduction over 4 years. I don't think that is impossible to do while keeping police visibility up, and a growing number of police chiefs are agreeing with that. In terms of his own force, the West Midlands, we're basically taking the funding back to the level it was in 2007. From the way he's speaking, you'd think you're taking it back to 1987.
Margot James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge the Prime Minister to resist these knee-jerk calls for a revision to the plans for the police budgets and police numbers. Let me urge the Prime Minister to remember that this is about the deployment of resources, the management of resources, and the more effective use of resources. That is the view of my own Chief Constable in the West Midlands, and that is the view that should prevail.
I think the Honourable Lady is entirely right. What matters is getting the most out of the budgets that are there. And frankly, let me just make, I don't want to, it's not a big day for politics, but both parties went into the election promising to make reduction in policing budgets. The party opposite a reduction of £1 billion. Now, because we are prepared to freeze police pay, to reform allowances, to ask for greater contributions to pensions, because we've got rid of the stop form, because we're reducing reporting on stop and search, we can make those reductions without affecting visible policing, but only because we've made those difficult decisions, which the party opposite isn't making.
Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday night, all was quiet across Ealing, but there had been warnings that Southall in my constituency may come under attack. Local people at the Sikh Gurdwaras, mosques, Hindu temples and churches arranged to place volunteers outside their religious places of worship to protect them. As the Prime Minister, I thank you very much for mentioning Southall and the role played by the volunteers during that day. But I must assure you that those people were led by local Member of Parliament, local councillors, faith leaders, community leaders and the business leaders. May I ask the Prime Minister to come out to my constituency and meet those volunteers plus those community leaders so that they can ask you a few questions which they feel that not answered not over here and not answered in the past, and they are fear that you may not be able to answer in the future. May I ask you to visit my constituency in the very near future?
I can see I'm going to get a number of very enticing invitations today. Let me make the point that I think the whole country admires what happened in Ealing Southall with the protection of the temple. And let me just say this, I have huge admiration for those people who want to protect their homes and their properties and their communities. Of course, it should be the job of the police, and we need to make sure the police are on the streets in greater numbers to do that. But I pay tribute to the people of Ealing Southall and what they achieved.
Mr. Peter Lilly.
Does my right honourable friend accept that by his statement and those that will be addressed by the subsequent statement from the Chancellor have one factor in common, a widespread belief that anyone can have anything they want without paying for it and without living within their means? Will my right honourable friend therefore resist the siren calls to give up his plans to make all departments, including the police, live within our means, especially as every police person I know, every police officer I know and have spoken to, says that they could dramatically increase the proportion of their time used effectively to public good if they were deployed more efficiently. It cannot be beyond the wit of man to live within those budgets, improve good policing with 6% fewer resources.
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very powerful point. I made a point of sitting down with my own Chief Constable in my constituency surgery and going through her budget line by line so I could see the changes that were being made, so that savings would be made but visible policing wouldn't be affected. With a 6% cash reduction, it can be done.
Harry.
The Prime Minister has made much, as others have, of the importance of parental responsibility. But does he realise that for many of those people involved in gangs, that their parents are actually the gangs? And some of the issues that we need to look at in terms of gangs and how they operate in inner city areas like Lambeth really are crucial in this whole debate. And could he also tell me, please, what he means by a gang injunction?
This is where they got the picture.
Well, first of all, the Honourable Lady is entirely right. There is no single one measure that is going to increase parental responsibility and break up gang membership. One of the reasons why I've asked the Right Honourable Member for Chingford to play a role in this is I think that before coming onto the front bench, the social justice organisation he was involved in spent a huge amount of time trying to look at the best practice in terms of dealing with gangs. Now, there are gang injunctions at the moment that only apply to adults. We'll be applying them to children that can prevent people from doing particular things. So that is a good start. But as I said, there's no one single answer.
Mr. Richard Ottaway.
Mr. Speaker, can I join my colleagues from Croydon in thanking the Prime Minister for his visit, which was hugely appreciated in Croydon, and I join them in their call to maintain the high police profile down there. But will he accept that once the situation's stabilised, we do need to look at the underlying causes, and as he says, to accept that there is a small group in our society that does not know the difference between right and wrong?
The Honourable Gentleman is entirely right. I think when you looked at the television scenes, it was quite clear this was criminality, it's quite clear it was looting, and it's quite clear a lot of it was done by very young children who should have been under the control of their parents.
Mr. Graham Stringer.
The Prime Minister is completely right when he said the tactics failed. Many of my constituents who support the police were horrified when they saw police in full riot gear watching as looters went into shops, filled plastic packs full of loot and left, unarrested by the police. This was a victory for criminals. Can the Prime Minister give my constituents and this House an assurance that if there is another criminal assault on the centre of Manchester, that all those criminals will be arrested?
Well, I can certainly go further than that and say that even those criminals who did that while the police weren't intervening in perhaps the way that he and others would like, they will be arrested too. Their faces and pictures are captured by CCTV. Even as we had the Cobra meeting this morning, there were 60 arrests taking place across London. I'm sure the same is happening in Manchester too. But I do agree with what he says, that we do need to examine tactics and make sure we get this right in the future.
Sir Robert Smith.
The Prime Minister has quite rightly identified this as major criminal activity, and therefore I welcome the fact that there's attempts to help the victims, and specifically the small businesses with deferral of tax. Will he also ensure that tax authorities do not penalise businesses who are late in filing tax returns and VAT returns because their paperwork and the disruption they're coping with?
We will certainly do that. That's why, as I said in the statement, there will be facilities for businesses affected to pay their tax late.
Paul Goggins.
Can I voice my support for the police, including the brave officers who faced unprecedented levels of violence and criminality in Manchester on Tuesday night? The Prime Minister says it's about now. Well, there is one very practical thing he could do that would reduce the pressure on the Metropolitan Police in particular, and that's to delay or preferably cancel the current proposal to allow terrorist suspects who are currently required to live away from London to return to the city from the start of next year. Will you give that proposal serious consideration?
Certainly, as the Honourable Gentleman served in the Home Office, I'll certainly look very carefully and closely at what he said. Let me join him in paying tribute to the police. And his fellow Member of Parliament for Manchester put it slightly differently. I'm sure everyone in this House will praise the bravery of officers and what they do, putting themselves in harm's way. It's not fair to blame them if sometimes the tactics don't work. And I think we have to be very careful in the way we express ourselves on this issue.
Andrea Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, the literally thousands of victims deserve to see justice done. And it does seem to me that there's a very heavy reliance on the use of CCTV to capture images. Are the police considering other things, for example, like spraying indelible chemical dye on rioters so that they can identify them and pick them up the following day?
Well, as I said, I think the police should look at all available technologies and should keep abreast of all potential developments here and in other countries to make sure they arrest as many people as possible.
Mr. Christopher Leslie.
Nottingham, the police public order squads who I accompanied last night are a tribute to the best of our frontline public service workers. But will the Prime Minister recognise and accept that the scheduled reductions in public spending, not only for the police but for fire, for the ambulance service, for the courts and for the much maligned back office staff too, will affect the ability of those teams to respond effectively? Will he please think again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is an hour and 20 minutes before I've said it, but I have to say it. There is a reason we're having to reduce these budgets, and that is because we inherited a complete fiscal car crash. And there is a connection. there is a connection between this statement we're having and the statement we're about to have, which is if countries don't get control of their fiscal situations, you can see what happens with even the largest countries in the world getting their debt downgraded.
Mr. Stuart Jackson.
Speaker, the Prime Minister is quite right to look at the events of this week in the context of social malaise and family breakdown. But can I press him on the point raised by my honourable friend and member for Gainsborough? The policy to which he refers, support for marriage in the tax system, was in the coalition agreement and the Conservative Party manifesto, on which we were both elected. Surely this week, of all weeks, it's time to look within a holistic context that we will support marriage in the family and that we will review the policy and bring forward proposals to support marriage in the family in our country.
Well, he's absolutely right that it was in the manifesto and it is indeed in the coalition agreement. The coalition agreement, where the two parties take a different view, makes allowance for that, and I remain a strong supporter of that proposal.
Mr. Alan Michael.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, I'm confident that our report will make a serious and significant contribution. But doesn't the Prime Minister accept that something more than that is needed? We need an in-depth, wide-ranging, full-time report led by somebody of the authority and independence equivalent to Lord Scarman. And we need that quickly if the issues the Prime Minister himself is referred to are to be fully explored.
Well, let me make a couple of points, Donald Gentleman. I know who served in the Home Office. First of all, sometimes the need for wider commissions of inquiry have come about because the House of Commons Select Committees couldn't get to the bottom of it. We're not even at that point yet. Secondly, these events are still continuing, so to start talking of what sort of inquiry now, I think is wrong. The third point I'd make is this, is of course you shouldn't jump to conclusions, but I think everyone is clear on the differences between what we've seen in the last 3 days and what we saw in 1981. This was not political protest or a riot about protest or about politics. It was common or garden thieving, robbing and looting. And we don't need an inquiry to tell us that.